Wave if you can hear me. Obviously, I can't answer that if you can't. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm assuming I sound fine. I am going to endeavour to make up time, so I apologise in advance. I'm going to go really quickly, the idea being that there's a workshop at the end, so if your interest is piqued by anything I've said, then please come and talk to me about it later. So I'm going to talk about SKA at high speed, with apologies to the astronomers in the room for whom this will be travelling over old ground. So the Square Kilometre Array, if you haven't heard of it, is the next generation big radio telescope that we're trying to get built as a big international consortium. Effectively, it will be for radio astronomy what the Large Hadron Collider was for particle physics. It's going to be the kind of Nobel Prize machine. So one of them for radio. Obviously, there are many other great Nobel Prize astronomy machines in other wave bands. Compared to the best instruments we have in the world today, it'll be about 100 times more sensitive, and it'll be about 1 million times faster at imaging the sky, so imaging the universe. In total, we want to get up more than 5 square kilometres of physical collecting area on the ground. And we want to spread those over the deserts in the 2 sites that it's going to be built up to 3,000 kilometres separation. So we're talking about a vast infrastructure project to really, blow to pieces the current best instruments that we have to work with. So to explain where it's going to go, SKA is an observatory which will exist in 2 different sites in the world, one in southern Africa, based in South Africa, and one in Western Australia. There are 2 phases of implementation for the SKA. The first phase is coming up really soon, is what I work on, and will be completed in about 2020, 2023, so actually really soon. And then following that, there will be a massive 10-fold upgrade of SKA Phase 1 to form SKA Phase 2, where everything is 10 times bigger in every possible dimension, which makes it actually maybe 100,000 times harder to handle. But we'll worry about that nearer the time when we get funding. At the moment, we're in a pre-construction phase, which lasts from 2013 to 2017. And that's part of a long-term strategy to get Phase 1 built. And the construction for Phase 1 cost about 650 million euros, so this is no small thing. Phase 2 is planned to be 10 times bigger with a budget of around 1.5 billion. Now, there's a question mark on this slide. I think it's because someone's worked out that if you times by 10, 650 million, you're not likely to get it under 1.5 billion. Something has to give, and probably it's the budget. So the timelines might slip because we need a lot of money to do this. This is a big international partnership, 11 countries so far, with an enormous budget, as I said. Headquarters, though, importantly for us, are in the UK, so they're at Jodrell Bank Observatory. So the UK is a leading partner in this. The government has committed a lot of funds to build SKA because it sees it as a good exemplar of a big data project. I need to make sure I play this little video. So this is just an artist's rendition of what SKA will look like in South Africa. So there would be 200 dishes spread across the desert. Each of these dishes is about 15 meters across. It's collecting radio data at frequencies of around 1.4 gigahertz. So looking at radio waves with a wavelength of about 20 centimeters for this one. So it's a big thing. It's just a kind of close-up of a dish. They just like to make these PR videos, I think, because it's like, ooh, it could really exist. Well, it could if we have enough money to do it. So I'm going to speed through. I said before, these dishes are spread out over the ground. I don't have a pointer, but they're in a specific pattern, which I'll come on to in a minute. But we want a range of different spacings between the different antennas as they sit on the desert. So we want long baselines and short baselines, short separations. And the first phase goes out to around 120 kilometers separation of these antennas. And as I said before, everything gets about 10 times bigger for the next phase. So that's the dishes that sit in South Africa. In Australia, the instrumentation is made up of these kind of ponds of antennas. As I just play this video. So each of these things we refer to as a station, a circular station, which is a collection of about 256 antennas. And there are 500 of these stations spread over the Australian desert, or there will be. So in total, there's something like 130,000 individual antennas that we need to deploy for the first phase. Each antenna is about the same size as me. I'm about a wavelength for this radio waves that we're interested in for this frequency. And they look like kind of Christmas trees or coat stands or TV aerials. They are essentially TV aerials. And they will work coherently or cohesively to give information on a vast range of different scales on the sky. So that's a huge infrastructure and information connectivity challenge, but we know how to handle gathering the information, we think. Just another artist rendition, there's quite a lot of these. Okay, so for those of you who don't know how an interferometer works, I'm just going to briefly mention it here. I don't want to go into too much detail, but the point is that if I take any particular pairing of antennas, any two antennas, and I aim them at a particular part of the sky, if I think about the radio signal or any other light signal that can come in from that part of the sky, the path to one antenna will be shorter than to another antenna. This is when is there a laser pointer? So you can see that the red antenna, the light coming from the distant source, which is represented as the line, the blue line, reaches the red antenna before it gets to the blue antenna. And the offset is just a geometric factor. We call it the delay. It's a very simple thing to visualize. Thank you. But this delay here is a very important quantity. So if we take the two signals coming in from the red antenna and the purple antenna, and we compare the phase of the wavefront, so if there's a crest in one wave but a trough in the other one, then they're out of phase. If we can measure that phase difference, we can effectively check that our supposition of the direction the light was coming from was correct. Any deviation from that delay we were expecting tells us the light came from a different part of the sky. You can kind of turn it around in information theory if you like, but basically we can get information on where the light was coming from based on a phase we measure with every pairing of antennas. Every different pairing of antennas gives us a different type of information. So effectively it gives us a different spatial frequency. So this is exactly the same as you will get in information theory with time and frequency domain. Here we're using spatial frequencies on the sky to tell us about different patches of the sky that might have contributed to our signal. Okay, I said that. So measuring that delay is really important, but we have ambiguity because we don't know how many wavelengths extra there were different between that trough and that peak that we saw. It could be that there were extra 6 wavelengths we didn't know about. So we need to build up more information, and we do that by comparing multiple different sets of antennas. So, antenna A and B and C and C and A all together. And you can do that for every single pairing and for every instant in time, because as the Earth rotates around, those antenna pairings effectively give information on a different spatial frequency. They sample a different part of the inverse plane. So this picture here shows what we call the Fourier plane, or the UV plane, for the sampling that we get from this telescope, or the model of this telescope. And this is a zoomed-in version of it. So everywhere that there is a bright color here shows that we have information on that particular spatial frequency. And the dark blue correspond to where we have gaps in our knowledge. Now, the important thing there is that basically we have lots of information, but it is imperfectly sampled. And this is something we've seen lots of today. Our information is incomplete. But at least in astronomy, we know that it's incomplete, and we know exactly how it's incomplete because we know for each sample where it's come from. So we need to remove the effects of that incomplete sampling. Okay, so the effects of that sampling are to produce a convolution of the true sky that we want to measure with our sampling function, if you like. So this is just a sampling function. This is my UV plane, my Fourier space. This is the pattern that I would get from having a tiny point source in the sky. It would actually come out looking like this, right? That's kind of junk. It looks fine if there's just one. You can infer that there was a source there. When I have multiple sources, a different flux, a different brightnesses next to each other, they're going to confuse me. I'm going to find it very difficult to work out what the true sky looks like. And in fact, it is impossible. There are many models of the sky that could always fit the data. So we have an inference problem. It causes a map to come out looking full of junk. So this is an image of the sky, so the coma cluster. This is what you get if you take the samples from the radio telescope and you do a Fourier transform on them, which is what you need to do to get back to real space. This is what you would see coming out of the computer. We're dominated by bright sources, so this is the source here, that have been multiplied by this sampling function, giving us disturbed images. So we have to clean the map. We call this a dirty map, we call this a clean map. And we use an algorithm which is many and varied ways of being applied, but basically you seek, you model, you subtract, and you repeat. So you seek in your map a bright object. Then you model what you think a point source would look like at that position. So you times it by this sampling function. And then you subtract some small fraction of that model from your actual map and see what you're left with. And then you look again to find the next brightest point, which may well be the same one again. And you keep going around iteratively, maybe 100,000 times, shaving off little parts until you get something that looks a bit more beautiful. If you're being very precise, you go all the way back to your Fourier domain, model it there, remove it there, and then go back. So we have to do this for SKA. But we have to do it in a regime which is much harder than ever before. And I'll try to explain why here. So this, you may have seen, is the Hubble Deep Field. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. They just said the Hubble Space Telescope, which is an optical telescope, had a blank patch of the sky for a long time. And there are 3,000 galaxies in here. These are all really lovely little spiral galaxies, beautiful little things, inspirational astronomy stuff. If you look at the same field with the current best radio instrument, you see about 15 radio sources, right? It's not really very impressive. But when we go to SKA, when it's up and running, we will see as many galaxies as the Hubble Deep Field, as the Hubble saw. We will start to be in a comparable regime to the best ever optical images. But that's really hard because we're going to end up with maps where this little guy down here is 1,000,000 times fainter than this guy here. But they're all being convolved by this sampling function, which is corrupting the images. And if I misclean this one, if I apply that incorrectly to a part in 1,000,000, it will completely wipe out my astronomy signal. And remember, we know about the bright sources. They're what we've already seen. It's these tiny faint ones where the science is going to be done for SKA. So we're in real danger of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. I'll try to show you just a fun little thing, why SKA is so hard and so good. We're interested in experiments that probe the universe in 3 dimensions, so not just maps, but actually like the physical distance away from us as well. So we want to basically get cones going through the universe. And this is a simulation of how we would observe the universe in neutral hydrogen as we go forward in time. So we're starting at really high redshifts. That means a very long time ago. Whoops, sorry. There are no galaxies with stars shining here, so that everything is nice and quiet. The hydrogen is all neutral. As the first stars start to form and switch on, they burn with ultraviolet radiation. That ionizes the hydrogen and blows kind of bubbles in the hydrogen around it. And this is like a kind of Swiss cheese. So if you go back far enough in time, the universe is kind of uniformly cheese. And as I look nearer and nearer, so in the more recent past, those bubbles of cheese are getting bigger, and I'm mostly getting bubbles and not very much cheese anymore. So that is a really fundamental experiment for SKA. And this is a slide showing the sky we can see now and all of the universe going back in time to that signal. So we want to measure exciting changes happening in a kind of spatial and statistical manner right at the dawn of time, basically, the dawn of galaxies. But in front of those things is a whole lot of universe. All of that universe, which is actually my bread and butter, I like these objects, they are in the way of this signal. So we have to characterize all of these foregrounds to very, very high precision in order to get to the Nobel Prize winning experiment for SK. And that is very, very hard. So yeah, when you're looking back at the dawn of time, there is a lot of universe in the way. So why is it so hard? SKA is going to have 65,000 separate frequency channels. We want to divide the universe into 65,000 slices as we look further away for every observation we make. But this is a big machine with lots of sampling on long baselines. So every map that we make has about 100,000 pixels on a side. So it's 100,000 pixels by 100,000 pixels by 64,000 different frequency channels. Suddenly these seem like very big things. If you don't know what 100,000 pixels looks like on a side, it's my 27-inch iMac screen scaled up to be as big as my house. But I can't look at that and analyze that sensibly, during my working day. So this is a lot of information that is hidden within all these things. So pushing to new science goals means we have to go deeper in the sky. That means the convolution and the calibration is all much, much harder because the sky becomes more complex. And we are much more likely to corrupt our science by misapplying calibrations. So we have to understand our instrument better than ever before. And many of our proposed experiments for SKA require actually around about 1,000 hours of integration on the target, which will be done in chunks of about 10 hours at a time. So I need to find a way of co-analyzing 100 different data sets. That doesn't sound too bad. We could dream about doing that with current instruments. The trouble is that the SKA data sets are very, very large. I will put you some numbers on the next slide, but basically we can't really afford to store all of the data forever. So we have a huge amount of complexity in the data processing, and we can't rerun the analysis. So the SKA looks like a photon gathering machine that pipes it through into a big supercomputer and then spits out science. And we don't yet have a way of going back in time because we made a mistake. We have to probably look at the sky again or something. This is really embarrassing and something that's a worry. So yeah, we need a big computer. We need the world's biggest computer at the moment, but in 10 years' time, we're hoping it will be affordable. And we have a lot of data to go in. So we have an issue that's relevant for this form, I think, that data location, like physical location of the data, is very, very important. The data is going to stay where it gets put because it's so big, we can't afford to pay for the intercontinental fiber optic links to send it from one. They might not even exist, actually, in enough capacity. And we have to introduce astronomers to a totally new way of thinking about their data. It's not really their data. It's their right to have time on the machine analyzing the data, and then that's it. We want to be able to use the data in many different ways. So here are some useful numbers which I thought would be good for us to have available. For SKA, each 6 hours worth of data, raw data, is 15 petabytes in size. That works out at about 2 exabytes per year. Right? This is quite a lot of data. I think I worked out that might cost about 150 million euros a year if you wanted to keep storing it and storing it and storing it. And some science groups seem to think that that's what they're going to do. And there are scientific arguments that that's a good idea, but it's an expensive idea. We're going to, so even after you have massaged the data to try and shrink it down, it's still about 10 petabytes for each full resolution cube. That could be a cube that's produced after 100 hours or after 1,000 hours or just after 6 hours. So we need to think about what the access patterns are like for that. We're going to have to basically generate a global sky model. So the calibration of the instrument is very sensitive to knowing well where the sources in the sky actually are, and then you can use those sources to fix your instrumental calibration. So our global sky model will exist and be owned by the observatory and actually be a public kind of facility. So that will be a useful thing that the SKA will produce, but we need that in order to do the calibration well enough. But I can imagine a scenario where, for the 1,000-hour experiment, we do the first quarter of it, and then we realize we have to throw it away because our sky model was not good enough. It's only when you get within kind of spitting distance of the real sky model that you can calibrate well enough, kind of go around in circles. So the issue is that radio astronomy data production hitherto has been very iterative, and we can't afford those iteration loops anymore. So data location really matters. If I can produce 15 petabytes in 6 hours, and that's 60 petabytes a day, but 1 petabyte per day would saturate a 100 gigabit per second link, and that would cost lots of money. So we need multiple of those links, but we need to find a way of funding that. So we really have bitten off more than we can chew, and we do need a strategy for how we deal with SKA because it's a facility that will exist for many years to come. The way that we store and curate and reuse the data needs to be thought about well in advance of us actually getting hold of the data. So, and it's not my job to tell people how to do it, but I think that at the moment the community is listening, and this is a good time to start thinking about it. We need to prioritize specific science use cases to guarantee that their data products definitely come out, and then do extra stuff if we can. But we know that we can't do everything to start with, and so for sure we will be throwing away information that, if you looked at it in the right way, could produce Nobel Prizes. So I tried to show this in a bit of a silly way, but these are like glass paperweights, right? Depending on how you look at this, you might miss out on the fact that the universe is in fact jellyfish-shaped, because you didn't project your data along the right axis. If I looked down the top of this, it would not look like a jellyfish. I would say, the universe is round. So we need to be able to kind of rotate the data around different axes in all kinds of dimensions, multi-dimensions, to extract the information. But we know that we can't afford to do it to start with, and that's a big concern. So we need we need knowledge exchange from other big data initiatives, and how we handle data ownership and the whole concept of data ownership is going to require massive changes compared to the way astronomers are used to working. And I wanted to find a nice sort of picture to summarize this. So apologies if this is a bit naff, but I wanted to find a picture of a toddler holding the complete works of Shakespeare, which is basically what we will be like when we get the SK. But I found something that's even more surprising, a kid's version of the complete works of Shakespeare. So this is perhaps true. So presumably in here, they've taken away all the Shakespearean text, and it's just plot, right? That's basically what we'll get from SK to start with. We have access to the full text. We don't have the tools to interpret that in any kind of cultural context. And so we're stuck just reading the story and saying, oh, isn't that nice? Like, you know, they killed them with the dagger. Oh, and we have no idea what it all means, right? There's no therapy going into this. So we're going to start off like babes in the wood, and then eventually, hopefully, we will be sophisticated enough with our analysis techniques that we can understand the full context for Shakespeare's complete works, and, you know, many, many Nobel Prizes will be born. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. I'm putting up some slides for Cambridge resources here, if you're interested in Cambridge high-performance computing services. Thank you.